let me introduce myself. I'm Beth Bovis, and I'm joined by Pei Yun Tang, and we together will be hosting this panel on how sustainability is affecting and shaping career paths. So we will shortly have our panelists joining us here and to commence, but we are looking forward to this dialogue with everyone. And I see our panel is joining us now. Welcome, panelists.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Hello.
Excellent. Hello. All right. So as we get started here, we're going to spend the next hour in a conversation around how sustainability is changing talent and careers in the workplace. The conversation is, we're going to start by sharing out some facts and information from a recent survey. We have been surveying over the years in this space about employee sentiment on sustainability, leadership and boardroom sentiment on sustainability. And we recently finished a survey of full-time individuals across the globe around how sustainability impacts how they look for jobs, how they think about the jobs they currently have, and how they seek to develop themselves and their skills going forward. So we're going to share through some of those results, and then we've invited 3 folks to join us for a conversation about what they see in their space. And they'll introduce themselves in more detail, but we have Jennifer Frame, who is at Dow, and she is the Senior Director of Talent Development and Workforce Insights, so she'll share her perspective. We have Nguyen from Stanley Black & Decker, who's our Chief Talent Officer, and Stephen Parker from Kearney, who's our CHRO, and they'll share their perspectives from their different organizations, and we'll actually have a bit of a back and forth and comment about what surprised us and what didn't about the survey results and what they're seeing in their sessions. I mean, in their companies. Excuse me for that. I had to turn off some alerts that were coming across my desk here. So with that, I'd love to ask the organizers to maybe bring up the couple of pages we're going to use to anchor and start the discussion, if we could. All right. And thank you. I just need to change my view on my computer screen. So thank you. I think I've shared, and we'll hear more from Jennifer, Min, and Stephen as we go through. And I see, so if we can go on to the next page, please. All right. So one of the things we asked people about, and I think we were surprised by the order of magnitude of what we saw in some of these numbers, but not at all surprised about the trends. Employee sentiment around sustainability and ESG has been increasing, and we've seen that increase over the last 5-6 years substantially. But when we asked real specific questions about when you're choosing a company to work for and you are asking about, and you're looking for a career, what are you looking at from a sustainability perspective, and does it even matter to you? And here we saw that 78% of people said it was an important part for their career and for their choices, whether their companies, to look at how the company's sustainable footprint is configured. And we interpret that to mean that at a minimum, they are looking at what is being publicly disclosed. We know from some pressure tests on recruiters that they're asking questions as they're coming into organizations and choosing careers. And then we see this a big uptick in to having 21% saying, I really would like my career to be focused on this area. So no matter what organization I'm joining, I may not be joining an organization whose primary purpose is ESG, but in any organization, I want to see that in there, and I would love to have a role related to the ESG efforts on that regard. And as they're thinking about their careers, we had almost half of them in this, I'll share, almost half the people said they were interested in taking additional development and training courses around building skills in sustainability, greenhouse gas emissions, circularity, and building out and deepening their professional skill set. So we're almost seeing, as we did with digital skills and people seeking out digital skills, a similar push from individuals on building out environmental and sustainable skills. When we looked at what specific factors around ESG company and people were looking at when they joined, we saw a very interesting trend. The number one was employer human rights, and included in that, so just for the audience to know, was not just compliance to legislation around anti-slavery and child labor, but also the concept of a living wage, and really wanting their organization to be supporting living wage around the world. The second was diversity and equity and inclusion. And then the third was responsible governance. And close to that was also sustainable products in the organization and looking for the organization to have sustainability built in their products. One of the things that I think we would make note of in this is that from an employee perspective, we see equal, if not more weight on the S part of ESG when they're evaluating the organization. And we don't think that's because the E part is less important to them, but we think it's because it's moving from a differentiator to table stakes in organizations. And employees and potential employees are expecting that their organizations are taking on an environmentally responsible stance. And now they're looking to see them up the game in terms of also a socially responsible stance in that space. So we see that not as, as a advancement and evolution over time in that thinking. And then when we talk to people about whether they would leave and what might cause them to leave an organization as a result, and we all know that in these surveys, if 72% of the people said they would leave if the company had poor commitment to human rights, it might not be that all of them would quit their job immediately, but we do know it means that they would start turning on their LinkedIn notices and they would start responding to recruiters and looking outside and eventually leaving. And here again, we see the same things that attract them are also the things that they look for that are triggers for them to start looking away from their current organization. So if they don't see a strong commitment to human rights and living wage, if they don't see a strong commitment to strong governance and DEI policies, and also if they don't see sustainability being embedded in the products and services that are being offered by the organization. Those are the things that are starting to detract them from the organization overall. And so when we look at this overall, we're quite encouraged by not just the willingness, not just the energy and attention that we see in the workforce, but also the willingness of people to take jobs in this space and want to build skills in this space to help advance that piece. And like I said, we do see this evolution similar to what we saw with digital, and we all still experience with digital, where there's a desire not only for skill uptake, but a presumption, and Pei-Yun will share shortly about the differences across generations. There's a presumption amongst those entering the workforce that this is what companies are thinking about and acting on, and it's not an expectation of it's something special or it's a side project, but that it is really a part of how the company operates. So with that, I think Pei-Yun, I'm turning over to you to share some of the more specific results around generations and geographies.
Thank you, Beth. If we go on to the next slide, we indeed will see a cut by age group of the 2,000 respondents that were part of this survey. Little bit of definitions first. Gen Z is defined as ages 16 to 25, so those born in the digital age. Then we have millennials, roughly age 26 to 40. And then Gen X, which is about early 40s to 57. And generally what we see is that the younger employees are more strongly motivated and engaged with sustainability. So the first stat that we see here is 76% of Gen Z workers say that they are more likely to spend time outside of their work duties to environmental and social causes. Why could that be the case? Perhaps this younger generation has been born in the digital age. They are better educated. They have, information all around the world at their fingertips. They tend to be also more health conscious, socially aware, and they also have lived through a couple of events which we would have considered once in a lifetime types of events, right? For example, the pandemic, now the climate change crisis, and also, the conflict that's going on with Ukraine at the moment. So this younger generation seems to be much more engaged, and they are also the ones who are most likely to want time out of their career to pursue, for example, social charitable work, for example, taking a sabbatical to work with an NGO, for instance. The other stat that we see is at work. In general, the younger generations, millennials and Gen Z as well, are the ones who are most likely to dedicate additional time on top of their workday to work-related sustainability efforts. So an analogy could be, that they would be willing to take a leadership role, driving green social or office related activities because they care about this. And even though it's not part of their formal job scope, they're happy to put their hand up and lead on this. And then in terms of the third stat, push factors, the Gen Z employees are also the ones who say that they're more likely to leave their jobs if the companies are not meeting the expectations in terms of, for example, giving back to the communities or fulfilling the obligations in terms of safe or respecting human rights of the employees, or even diversity and equity and inclusion policies as well. So generally, we see that the younger generations are the ones who have higher expectations and are willing to act on employers that are not meeting their expectations on sustainability. If we move on to the next slide, let's take a cut by regions. This is pretty interesting. So our survey was spread across these 5 countries. And what we saw was that, first of all, overall, more than half of employees all across the globe say that they would like to be part of ESG opportunities at work if given the chance. And you see that the more enthusiastic countries are actually India and Brazil, almost 20% higher than, for example, Australia and UK on the other side. If you look at India, for example, employees in India are by far the most dedicated to ESG in their careers. They are most likely to rate their employers high, right? And also more likely to engage in work community engagement activities, diversity and inclusion activities, but they are also more likely to leave their organizations if there were, for example, lacking in responsible supply chains, charitable giving, or responsible governance. So it's interesting to see this regional spread, and in the discussion later, we would be keen to dive a little bit deeper into whether we're seeing this in our panelist organizations as well. So with that, those were the snapshots of the survey that we wanted to throw out there as a fire starter. And now let's move on to the second part of our agenda, so we can drop the slides now. And let's turn it over to our panelists. We're going to take up to 5 minutes with each of the panelists now, starting with Jennifer, then Min, then Stephen. I'd like to invite each panelist to please briefly introduce yourself, and please share how your organization connects sustainability with your talent agenda. Over to you, Jennifer.
Okay, hi, just checking my sound. You hear me okay?
Yes, we do.
Perfect. Thanks so much for having me. Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Frame, Senior Director for Talent Development and Workforce Insights at Dow, based at Dow's global headquarters in Midland, Michigan. You know, Dow is a material science company at its heart. So we have, of course, a long history of needing to, attract and retain talent that really has science and progress and innovation at its forefront. But would also say, in alignment with some of the comments that you just saw about the survey data, we're definitely seeing changes, even over the last 3 to 5 years, certain changes in our talent demands, talent requests, but are also, I think as a company trying to do a better job of really sharing our story. So, maybe I'll make a comment both from an external perspective as well as from an internal employee perspective. I was reflecting on this, and I think sometimes we may do better sharing our story on sustainability and our ESG efforts, a better job of that externally, sometimes with our partners, with our shareholders and stakeholders that are interested in that. And we find often our employees maybe don't have as complete an understanding if their job isn't really, fully integrated with the work that's going on heavily in that space. So that's something we have focused on the past couple of years internally, is how do we build that awareness, build that excitement and energy and interest. So I think we have to put efforts in both places. But I'd say for a long time, we've been sharing our story as part of our recruitment efforts when we're getting out to universities, investing in programs at the high school and middle school levels that really build an interest, in STEM broadly, and of course in areas of innovation that are going to help us drive our longer term interest and challenges. And maybe just a couple comments also on the survey data. So when I saw the survey data, I would say directionally from what I see within my company, it all made sense to me. I say, yeah, that resonates. I would say, some numbers are probably maybe higher than I would have expected as far as the importance of some of the sustainability importance to the career. But I also think that it may just be sometimes how we talk about this topic. So for example, when we ask a question about, internally, when we ask our employees a question about sustainability or the importance or some of the specific things, maybe that term doesn't always resonate, back to, do we understand all the different things? But when we get down more to the details of what is important related to, things like equity or social justice or reducing carbon or, innovating, ending plastic waste, people very much, engage and want to be part of that. So, we have had some large scale efforts like our Pulling Our Weight campaign to reduce plastic waste that employees have gotten very engaged in that. They bring their families, they all, become a part of it. So I think sometimes it's maybe how we talk about it at its heart. I think, pretty much most or all employees have an interest and are getting engaged, but it may be more of the earlier career folks, the younger generations that have some of the terminology right around it and maybe some of the more pointed questions. But I'd say we're seeing across the spectrum within our organization an interest in getting involved, making a difference and such. So maybe I'll pause there for now because I know we're going to come back to some specific questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Nguyen?
Hey, good morning, and thanks for having me. My name is Nguyen, and I'm on a talent team, one of 70,000 people at Stanley Black & Decker. So at Stanley Black & Decker, we have the luxury of having a CEO and leadership team who are major, authentic supporters of ESG. We are a company, in my experience, that we don't need to talk our executives into supporting ESG. Our CEO is asking us, why aren't we going faster? So let me give you some examples. We're a signatory to the UN Global Impact on Human Rights, Labor, and Environment. We signed the Gender Parity Commitment, which puts us on a path, or at least sets the goal, and there's a lot of hard work to be done to get to gender parity by 2030. We launched, and a team member named Karen Rubano did the heavy lifting here. We launched what we called a returner program last year. And this is helping mid-career parents who took time off to focus on their family. We're helping them ease back into their careers with internships. And a very high percentage of those internships, if they want, are converting to regular jobs. We're about to kick off Mental Health Awareness Month, where we've got a whole lineup of events, from having medical staff talk about sleep, to yoga classes, to stress management, to financial resilience. And that work's being led by Heather Lynch on our team. And I'm also excited to talk about, we're the first tool company to come out with what we call the Reviva line of tools. It's power drills, hand tools that are made of 50% recycled materials. So the first in the industry. Our strategy is kind of organized under 3 pillars. First is empower makers. Makers are the craftsmen, the tradespeople, the people that help build homes or help you fix things in your homes. Our first pillar is to empower the makers, and we're doing this through targeted donation of tools and heavy investments in upskilling and reskilling. Our second pillar is to innovate with purpose, and therefore our line of tools that are recyclable. Our third pillar is creating a more sustainable world. So we're organizing our investments and our energy around those three pillars. What I'm probably most excited about is the impact to culture. In a world where we are decisive about a lot of issues, ESG has something everyone can kind of cling on to, whether it's better corporate government, environmental concerns, or social impact. I think 99% of people can cling on to something and rally around it. I'm also excited that investors are asking about our company's ESG efforts and that there are billions and billions of dollars flowing into companies. So happy to be here and happy to take questions later.
Thank you, Min. Last but not least, Stephen.
Thanks, Nguyen. Hello, everybody. Very excited to be in this group and have this conversation today. So I'm the CHRO of Kearney. Very proud, to be in my role and to support the count today, 4,568 what we call Kearney Originals. And I like to remind myself of the exact number out of our IS system, because otherwise, how can you be an original if I'm rounding it to 4,000 or 5,000? And I think it's sort of part of our heritage, actually, that drives why this is so important to all the talent that we bring on board. Because I think if I start from the perspective of the individuals, we have this sort of point of view that we really want people to be their full selves and their best selves. And so it's interesting, some of the stats, and I think about this a lot generationally. I don't think other generations necessarily cared less. I just think it wasn't part of their work agenda necessarily the way it is today. And I think it's terrific that it's almost demanded in these conversations to say, what do you stand for, and why, and how will that show up in work? Not just in some nice to do ads. It has to be at the heart of organizations. So we work hard at that. We have a great foundation because we had a founder, Tom Kearney, that wrote this sort of amazing set of principles about essential rightness. So his whole idea of consulting was to do the right thing and to make a positive impact on clients, communities, and our people. So we've always tried to build on that. Doesn't mean we're always perfect at all. But then we recruit bright and talented people who really also care about this. So they push us hard. I think that there's sort of two avenues where it shows up. Clearly, the work we do, some of our core expertise is strategic operations and transformation. And so we're proud to sort of be helping our clients. And I've noticed, we've gone from saying there are some useful extra skills around sustainability and ESG topics to it becoming now, no, we need deep expertise, to we are writing sort of job descriptions of people and practices and experts. And it's the sort of fastest growing part of our talent areas in many of our countries, which is very exciting. And, I can talk a bit later. We now try to offer opportunities for all our people to be part of this because it touches all our work. The second is the piece I talked about earlier, internally. How can we be a better organization, from the 120 social impact groups we have around the world, doing all sorts of amazing things to improve our journey. We're proud of being one of the first consulting firms I think it was back in 2010 to be carbon neutral. We need to get better and build on that. We have huge passion around social and racial justice around the world as well, again, driven by many of our individuals driving change. And I think it comes back to then, what's the biggest thing we need to do internally? Jennifer touched on it. It's sort of, there's greater facility with language in our new intake, asking us questions. So we need to be better at having those conversations and making it part of the daily lexicon. And I think what's become evident to me, it's not just about describing, hey, we can be an amazing place, and here's what we stand for, and here's our purpose. I find that more and more of the individuals that we recruit and work in our organization also want to have amplified what they stand for. Because it's not just, hey, here's an umbrella, it's sustainability and ESG, and isn't that terrific? There's so much nuanced detail that I really think what we're trying to look at is how to make sure our individuals are specific about what do you care about? Because to care, you have to be a little bit more specific than, yes, I care about ESG. So we're actually doing a lot of work to say, well, what matters to you and how can that show up for you? And how can you bring your energies and passion around that specifically, not just generally? And that seems to resonate a lot in interviews, in recruiting, in campuses, but also for our own current people as well.
Thank you so much, Stephen, and thank you so much also to Jennifer and Min for starting us off with your reflections. I'm gonna kick off the panel discussion with a few questions, but I also wanted to invite the audience members. If something pops up to your mind, feel free to already ping some questions, and we'll make sure that we'll take the last 20 minutes of this call. But first, let me start. I thought it was fascinating that I think we heard from Stephen, we also heard from Jennifer that, the firm or your organizations have been, and Min as well, your organizations have made, significant commitments and steps towards being more sustainable companies, to being leaders in your own industry. And, there's been a lot of activity in terms of making these commitments, giving back to the community, coming up with sustainable products and services, but yet that still seems to be sometimes, a bit of a challenge, making sure that all of our people are up to date, understanding what the firm does and how they can get involved. Why do you think that there is this, a little bit of a lag or disconnect? Is it just, there's just too much, or it's about opportunities to get involved, or why do you think we are so good at telling the story externally, but internally sometimes people still need to catch up on
that? This is Jennifer. I can comment since I mentioned that in my remarks. I think a big part of it, unfortunately, is there's just so much that people are managing that hearing some of these additional messages, it can feel like extra stuff. So I think where we have more success is back to meeting the employee, where they're at, right? How do we make it relevant to their role? And I think, probably it's an easy for any role to understand some of the maybe the social aspects, right, with equity, or a topic like pay equity, right? I think everybody that probably piques their interest, but when it comes to some of the other topics, I think it's how do you make it relevant to their role. But yeah, employees just have so much competing communications and messages, and are just trying to get their daily work done. But I think we have to translate it. Also, I've said we're a material science company, but of course not every employee that works at Dow is a scientist. I'm not an engineer or a chemist, by background. So I think sometimes the messages, because we have so many deep experts that are really into their work, the same messages may not resonate to all types of employees. So we have to, again, kind of meet them where they're at. How is it relevant in their role? And, myself as an HR professional, right, I have felt much more connected to this whole ESG world the past few years, as we have pulled in that S angle and done things like, from our corporate reporting standpoint, in the past, we had separate sustainability report and a separate kind of diversity and equity report that we did externally. Last year, we combined those two into one broader, ESG report. So even as an employee, that helps me better see the connection. So that's just one example. Thanks.
Yeah, we think it's registering with our employees just because we're doing so much. It's tangible, it's quantitative as well, and it's of course symbolic as well, and inspiring. I do see, I would explain this dynamic as kind of the grass is greener on the other side. And so when we hear of an external company doing it, it's a large percentage of the information we have on that company. And therefore it makes it's easier to become associated with that company. Where internally, just as Jennifer was saying, it competes with a lot of other signals. But I think by and large, if you're genuine about it, you talk about it a lot, you can quantify some of your goals, and some of your output is tangible, like we can touch it. It'll register with the workforce.
I think that last point's really important, Min, about, and Jennifer, you mentioned it, how to make it relevant and tangible. And ultimately, I think that comes down to also an ability to tell stories. So I think we are hampered by that. We have a lot of experts who are highly analytical and fact-based. And sometimes even when they're so in the details of the amazing things we might be doing for clients, it often doesn't translate to other practices, other groups. So I think we have a need, I think, to sort of be able to tell those stories, to bring it to life. I think we amaze each other in our firm in Kearney when we finally sit around and say, we were doing this, and everyone's like, we did that with that client? That's amazing. Like, why didn't you tell me? It's like, well, we probably did. And, the challenge of the last 2 years has been, we've all become a little bit numb because of life and because of we're in this sort of screen world. And we're not good at telling stories about it. I'm always, when I see another organization tell a story about it, I'm always looking at that's clever and powerful. And I think that's really important, because we get lost in also the detail. There are so many aspects of sustainability. Sometimes I think we talk at each other and we don't realize one person's really fascinated and passionate about poverty, and the other person, it's all about circularity. And we sort of nod. So that to me is, certainly from a Kearney perspective, we have to tell our stories to ourselves better.
No, I agree with you, Stephen. And one thing I'd love to add is, just because your customers, stakeholders, or employees have changed their bar doesn't mean it didn't register. And so we'll create the first tools that are recyclable, but the demands of the customer, stakeholders, employees didn't go up. And that's okay. Don't be discouraged by it. It's the wonders of that customer feedback.
Yeah, and I think, every organization is on its own journey, right? Even the ones that, for example, win sustainability honors, there's always much more to do because the space is so complex and evolving so quickly. Perhaps one question, how do we think about attracting and retaining talent for whom sustainability is increasingly important, right? Because they're also the ones who know more about it. They know what good looks like. They're the ones who, will be expecting more and more. So how do we create enough opportunities to help them feel like they are, have the opportunity to mobilize, to build skills in this space? And does the organization see that this is, a nice to have, in that, it's a additional contribution of that employee on top of their day job, versus, hey, this, taking a leadership role in sustainability is actually, a core competency, and, is a hallmark of a great leader, and is key to us, transforming to be a sustainability leader and for the firm to thrive in a low carbon future. So how do you think about, creating these pathways to attract and retain talent?
It's a great question. I think when investors start asking about ESG, and it's no longer an after school club event, it's like part of the job, right? When I think about this, ESG is so broad that I don't think about like a university or path that's like ESG skill sets. I think almost every skill set that you can develop probably has a place in ESG somewhere. So I think more about how authentic is your energy? Like, will you follow up with that energy, or are you just curious? And then I think about what is your job and what is your natural strengths? And then what is the opportunities to connect it to? And then there's technology that can help do that. So that's kind of how I think about it versus developing ESG specific skill set, because I just think it's so broad.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, on the one hand, I'd say we probably started our journey, with this maybe, 5-7 years ago, as far as skill sets, thinking about how do we build the sustainability mindset. And, we had some academies and we did some trainings and got people involved. And I think that had some positive effects of getting people more aware. But as time has gone on, it's more about just everything that we do driving towards our strategy as a company. So other things like, innovation or, a mindset that's challenging the way things have been done in the past to solve some problems that, maybe 10 years ago sounded, insurmountable or sounded like things that as a company we wouldn't take on. Now we are taking on, and we need people that really can step up and bring that innovation. So I think we have to look for the people that can do all those different things and really drive towards that overall strategy.
Yeah, I would echo both those points. I really liked your one, Min, about it's not the club. I mean, I think in one of the questions of the survey that we did, 90% of our people said these factors were important. So we have to, in order to attract talent, show that this is part of the work that you will do. Not if you could only create space, you too can join a side project. Now, there's tremendous passion to do some of these side projects as well, pro bono work or social impact work, or but we have to make it the core. And so we're actually trying to organize ourselves to make sure that anyone that has passions towards some aspects of the sustainability world can express it and feel that a portion and a good part of what I do every day is linked to this. So I think it's becoming, it's sort of at the heart of our talent agenda. And again, I'm not saying like we do it perfectly all the time, but that's why to me it comes back to helping individuals understand like, well, what matters to you, and are you able to be this person and drive this every day, and in conjunction with what we think matters to us as an organization. And it's making people realize this is a conversation you should be having with us and with your leaders and with your teams, because otherwise we don't get the best of everybody and we don't have the biggest impact we can. And I've seen that resonate a lot, actually, in terms of pushing our individuals and giving them tools and process to think, do you know what matters to you, and why does this matter to you, and therefore how can you become even more passionate and drive and push us? And it's quite a sort of liberating conversation, because I think 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, if you wanted to join a consulting firm, our interviews were all like, show us how smart you are. And now it's a huge dose of, well, show us what you care about. And then they're challenging us. You tell us, Stephen, what do you care about? And what do you stand for? And I think it's great, because I think if that becomes the bar for talent everywhere, then we can all only do better and better things for our communities.
Absolutely. And maybe one final question for me, and then I'll turn it over to Beth and the audience. We saw on the slide just now that India and Brazil were ranking much higher in terms of employee engagement and sustainability than, for example, Australia, UK, and US. I was wondering, have you seen trends in your organizations or industries? Any thoughts on why that could be the case?
I'll happily go first, just to reverse our order. This was the one slide that actually did surprise me, but I spent a few minutes thinking about why, because I anecdotally I've sort of seen equal zeal everywhere, and it's sort of, I was surprised to sort of see a sort of flow across this trend. And then I could sort of surmise, because some of the most passionate initial ideas might have emerged from places like Australia, the United Kingdom, but then we have huge initiatives that our Brazilian and Indian colleagues are doing. But so that was the surprise to me. I would have thought it was sort of equal zeal. I've not seen a difference in enthusiasm at a sort of individual level. I might have seen like a difference in terms of scale, because some are pushing countries to change things, and in some places countries are already supportive, and maybe they're actually pushing to say, well, let's not become passive just because we have all these rules and targets and laws. Let's push harder.
So
Please go ahead. Okay. Yeah, maybe just to add on to that point, my only thought, so I was a little surprised because I also haven't necessarily seen that internally a big differentiation. My only, thoughts kind of back to what was just said is there are some countries where there is a lot of, regulation, government, involvement or mandates, and that may sometimes affect how employees are feeling about, their involvement versus just their own, desire and innovation to get involved. But yeah, I haven't necessarily seen that on our side. Thanks.
So I've seen major differences, but I've got a broad population. Keep in mind, I've got everything from plant manufacturing to AI scientists, right? And so the patterns that I'm seeing tends to correlate. I haven't measured it precisely, just to be clear, but it seems to correlate between socioeconomic levels. So for example, someone that's making $15 an hour may have a different ordering of priorities. It doesn't mean they care less or there's any judgment I should make on their priorities, but they may have a different ordering of priorities in the moment than someone who's, an HR person making whatever they're making. And the other difference I'm seeing, and again, we've got a big cross section of the country, and quite honestly, in the parts of the world as well, is politics. And the energy and reaction and the tone of the conversation varies based on politics. Again, I haven't measured it because we're not asking people which party they're aligned with, but I believe I'm seeing those patterns.
I think that's a good point. Because I don't know if we're going to talk a little bit about, I think one of you referenced like the skills. It might have been you, Jennifer, that said like, look, it touches on everything. Yeah. But what you just said, Min, reminded me of one of the things I think it's just a critical skill to me in this whole world is listening. We tend to, seek first to be understood when really, we need to sort of understand others, because it's very easy in this world to sort of be very passionate and have a point of view and then start proselytizing everywhere. And then it can give the assumption that others don't care, when actually I think people just care in different ways. And we need to sort of, find that way to have these conversations skillfully across our organizations where we listen to each other's and allow authentic responses, not, and I'm just as bad at this, not sort of make people feel bad because they're not doing what you're doing. That's one of the critical soft skills I think is becoming more important.
Yeah, absolutely. And do we need to use the term, and I'm not, everyone needs to do what works for them, but I've chosen not to talk about global warming. I want to talk about clean air for your children, for me and you. That's more what I want to talk about, because global warming means different things to different people, including scientists. So that's kind of how I'm approaching it.
Yeah.
Well, Payun, should we switch to some audience questions? Well, you don't have to have just me on the stage. We can bring everyone on. But I think one of the questions, as they get the camera out, that we got from the audience, and I know from our prep discussions, we have some great answers amongst the organizations here, which is, to the point we were discussing about this, we have to meet people where they are and engage them in the ways they want to be engaged. What are some of the ways and some of the programs you have in your organization to ensure that people can be a part of the sustainability journey and the ESG journey, whether it be, as we talked about, it could be their job, but we talked about for many, it isn't their day-to-day job. And so how can they engage in some of the programs and efforts that you have going on?
Sure. This is Jennifer. I can comment on a couple of examples. We're also a company that has a broad array of types of roles, from manufacturing to professional services and such. So one of the the challenges is we've long for forever really been very supportive of things like employee volunteerism and getting involved in the community to make a positive impact. But we have found that our our workers that are on shift, for example, that have to, take, have a replacement to come take overtime for them. It's more of a challenge for them to flex their schedule and take some time off. So one thing we did last year was implement a global policy around taking time off for both employee volunteerism activities and also participation in our employee networks, our employee resource groups. Now, most professional employees or office workers were already able to flex their schedules. So this wasn't intended to be some sort of limit on them, but more to enable the full array of our population to take advantage. So that's one example. We also have some specific programs that are available to take time out for supporting disaster relief, as an example, or things like that. But we've also had, as far as programs that are more broadly available, not so job specific, opportunities for employees to get involved in our 2025 sustainability goal activities. So in a given year, we might have a number of projects that people can kind of raise their hand and say, hey, it's not part of my core role, but I want to spend 15-20% of my time to get involved in one of these projects that's supporting our long-term goals. And then maybe the third thing I'll mention is more of a, I'd say, grassroots or networked group of folks that have interests in the broader array of sustainability and ESG efforts that are just part of a social, internal kind of social network and sharing of opportunities, ideas, things going on. And that's something that people can just opt in if they're interested to be a part of. So a couple of examples from my side. Thanks.
Great examples. I'm going to steal some of those ideas. Thank you. I'll add for the audience is that one thing we seem to skip in our that's related to ESG in our conversation about the future work and hybrid work is that if you decide to ask everyone to come back to the office, that's a carbon footprint. And so if you believe in ESG and you make this decision, which it could be a good decision, you just have to realize that. And there may not be a single people or workforce decision that has such great impact on carbon than your future work policy. Mm-hmm. So that's the only thing I'd add.
That's a great admin, because I think we don't sometimes connect. ESG is all interconnected, but we don't always connect to see those connections and take them into account. So one of the things that has come up in a few questions from the audience, so I'm going to kind of combine, even though I know you are not the ones who set the standards for your companies on ESG, there are some questions about, how do you, to this point of meeting people where they are, how do you make sure what you're aspiring to do is bold enough and big enough to make an impact, but yet reflective of the different realities that people are living in terms of where they're living in the country, what part of the organization they're working in. So you have, as we talked about, you have the EU regulating things, and you have other countries where it's left to each company to do that. So how are you managing the conversations with your employees who might be saying, hey, we need to do more, because where they're sitting, they'd like to do more against your overall, kind of the overall average, which is quite good, if that makes sense. Since I know you're not setting the targets, it's more about how do you manage the conversations of people pushing you to be more aggressive versus knowing what is tangible and practical to do.
Yeah, so at our company we have essentially affinity groups. We've adopted a technology called Workplace by Meta, and they're able to just crowdsource ideas, crowdsource that energy, and so that's our place of kind of having a virtual town hall. It's really about transparency in your goals. So we have our 3 pillars. We're publishing soon our ESG report. And our CEO and leadership team talks about it a lot. And then we do listening sessions. So our employees all have an ability to voice their opinion. They have an ability to, at a micro level, affect some of this in their daily job. On a macro level, and call me an optimist, but I think they can change. I think everyone can change the world. And if we've got that great idea that's well articulated and supported by data, I think you could change a CEO's mind. That's just how I think about things.
That's wonderful. I also am an optimist like you, Min, and we publish our annual sustainability report. I think we've all noticed the good thing is that maybe for a while people thought it was for external consumption only. And no, we say like, hey, we'd love all our colleagues to read it and quiz us. And many do, but not all. And I think that goes back to, we're doing some training to sort of make sure we all understand Sustainability 101. What are we talking about? Because it can be complex. You can get lost in the weeds. You can feel like, I don't really understand enough of it, therefore I won't comment. Or I only know one piece of it. So I think we're trying to get a sort of greater shared lexicon so that we can all comment. I have the privilege of having a quick look at our we do a survey twice a year, and the number of words related to us pushing our sustainability agenda goes up. If I did a giant Wordle, there was hardly any reference to it in our pulse surveys. Now it's a regular push, and it's increasing in size. So I think more and more of our colleagues feel able and invited to have a conversation about it, but it's still a good prompt, Beth, around, I'm not sure I have a good answer for how do you balance, someone really pushing hard on something that's way beyond what we think collectively is a bold move. We sort of, how do we keep that conversation there when we know we can't do it everywhere? I think ultimately, though, it comes back down to sort of personal relevance. Like, what's the biggest thing you can do? And then how can you encourage 3 more of your colleagues to do it? I mean, as we know in our organization, I mean, you spoke to it, our biggest thing is travel. Because we are just an entire people organization. We think as that's our sort of day job. And that's real because we did no travel for 2 years and now it's a pivot. And we know the answer is not completely work from home, and we know the answer is not traveling 5 days a week. But now we have to have real conversations about what is the right way of working that truly manages you and your team, but manages your possible impact on your community and the planet. And these are real steps. And I don't have the answers, but I think that's the conversation we need to have, because that'll make us bolder.
Excellent, thank you. We got another question in around that point you made about learning, Stephen, and just asking what you are seeing in terms of skill specific, role specific, or other types of training and development that's being either asked for or that you're putting into your organization to support, raising the ESG IQ or training people differently for their roles to incorporate an ESG mindset?
I think it's a good question, and I'm happy to talk to that person offline as well, through whatever medium. What I would really encourage, so there are ESG jobs, there just aren't thousands of them in any particular company, right? There just aren't. What I encourage, so ESG is kind of one of those emerging fields, so like people analytics is and machine learning was and kind of still is, where your best learning isn't education in a traditional sense, because that would dull the creativity. Your best learning is maybe Google, followed by attending sessions like this and lots of questions, and then what your creativity can come with, because this is such a new field. I'm sure one of these universities that need to generate revenue will create a course on ESG skills. I just don't think you need it. So I think it's all within your fingertips.
Yeah, I would agree. There's a level of education that we all need to do, to just read what's out there and join in conversations. We have a need because of our client work that, yes, as I said earlier, we are recruiting far more of people in these specialized areas. And then, we are also trying to offer opportunities for people tangential to these sustainability departments, functions, practices to learn a bit more as well, and then bring everybody up to the same sort of language level. But then it becomes quite dispersed in terms of what's needed, because if you're talking about equity, then we know, for instance, inside our organization, we needed these skills of how to be a better ally. No point having great diversity agendas if the second people join, they don't feel they belong. So we've had a big push on the skills of allyship, which again is interesting. You talk to people about sustainability, not everyone will think, oh, that links to sustainability, because I have a mindset that sustainability is about green, is about circularity. And that sort of goes back to, there are so many aspects of this. It's making sure we tap into individual passion, and we're clear on how this fits. It's all part of, doing well, doing good, doing better.
Yep. Yeah. And I would align with the comments just made, right? The number of true jobs that you could define as, some of our sustainability leader jobs, right? Versus the total amount of jobs. I think it's more about the breadth and getting people involved, getting to people to understand how their role makes an impact. And back to my earlier, comment about innovation, mindset, challenging the way that things have been done in the past. Those are the skills we're building that are relevant, not just to this topic, right, but also to a number of other topics as well.
So let me, since we're getting to the end of our time, and we know we have another conversation and dialogue to start shortly thereafter, I'm going to do a little bit of wrap up, and then I'll go to each of you for a final comment about your thoughts on the topic of this intersection of talent and sustainability. Just to, one of the things that struck me in our conversation and the conversations that you all had was the two trends, and we saw it in the data as well, of this, and I'm going to shamelessly steal forever, Min, your analogy of this going from an after-school club to part of the core of school, right? This is this translation into the core of the strategy of the company that you talked about, Jennifer, and the core of the employee experience is something that we're seeing happen in terms of, I think if anything, the statistics we shared show how this permeates everything from a day-to-day perspective. And then you all shared how you are also kind of making this a part of things instead of something on the side. I think the other piece that is also market is that we're in the midst of this. We're not in any way at the end. So this is an ongoing conversation with employees, with our organizations, to tap into their passions, tap into their interests, and mobilize them into new products that are coming out, initiatives that are happening in the organization, building their careers across the place. And then the final thing that I was struck with was that all of you in some way talked about, in order to make this authentic, it has to be both tangible and it has to be relevant to the people where you are. So great to have, flexible volunteering, but if it doesn't work for somebody who's got a shift schedule, that isn't authentic. So making those things connect up is an important part of meeting people where they are, and I would expect nothing less from good HR professionals for you to be thinking about an employee-centric view of that. So maybe I could just ask each of you, to take 20, 30 seconds and share your final comments as we close out this session. So why don't I start with you, Jennifer, because you're first on my screen.
Okay, sure. So first of all, thank you. And I've also made some notes during this conversation and have learned from my colleagues and peers here. So thank you, for the sharing. I think this is an exciting space, and I love the messages that I think we've heard from all of the panelists of it's making progress in this area with our talent, with attracting and retaining, to me is exciting, right? It brings another element of interest and things for us to really get energized about, because sometimes, working at a material science company, a manufacturing company, may not always be the most glamorous type of thing, but I think when we can share these stories and the ways that we're both making progress within our own company as well as giving back to the community and the larger global, people get excited about that. So love the discussion, and thanks for having me.
Hey, Min?
I think we're out of time, so I'll be brief. Tomorrow's Earth Day. And to save our Earth, we need everyone across the political spectrum. So it's not a us or them. We need everyone.
Thank you. And Stephen?
Well said. I've really enjoyed the conversation because I think this makes me think more vibrantly about this. The thing to me that is still at the heart is we have to do a better job of telling our story as an organization of why this matters and how to not complexify what is already highly complex. But the key to me is how do we enroll people in why does this matter to them? Because lots matters to our people, and I think we need to invite rather than sort of preach, so that we can make sure how does this fit to the purpose and meaning of all our individuals, and therefore how do they see themselves showing up in this purposeful journey.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you so much on behalf of Pei-Yun and myself. We thank everyone for joining us for this conversation and this session. It's my understanding there's a short, which is why I was a little less worried about the blinking red light at us, Min. There's a short break between now and the next session for people to run to grab a coffee or take care of anything personal. But thank you, Jennifer, Min, and Stephen for joining us. On behalf of Pei-Yun and I, we really appreciate it, and happy Earth Day, everyone.